Scott, thanks for joining me on CFO at Home today.
I'm excited to be here. Thanks for having me.
All right, my pleasure. We want to talk about a few things, starting with your book, The Lobster League. And the thing is, when you have a book called The Lobster League, I don't really have to go far with a first question here, an icebreaker to get the conversation started. So let's go ahead and dive in. Can you explain the meaning of the title of your book, The Lobster League?
Yeah, it's my first book, my only book, a book that I had thought about writing conceptually for probably at least 10 years. The concepts I came up with, but originally the book was written with my deceased aunt as the main character. And she was a wonderful person, just an unbelievably good-hearted person that I felt would be disarming to use as a person that people felt comfortable talking about. And she loved lobster. And she was from Gloucester, Massachusetts, which is the setting of the book. And after writing a very rough draft, somebody said, "Your aunt's nice. She seems great. She's a nurse. Is that really the right person?" So I had to rewrite the book, but the lobster stuck and the location of Gloucester stuck. So that's how all that came about. So it has nothing to do with finance.
You said that your aunt was a nurse and somehow that didn't fit the theme of the book. Could you tell us a bit more about that?
Yeah, so one of the things that I wanted to do is I read a lot. So what I wanted to do is I didn't want it to make it seem like I was lecturing. I didn't want to make it to seem like it was a textbook or anything like that. I wanted to feel like somebody's reading a novel.
Okay.
That kind of is how the whole process started, how I came up with her as the person to make it relatable. The problem that kept getting pointed out to me is that in a fairly short book, you needed an expert sitting in the middle of the scene's situation to be able to digest the information that was coming out as an expert. And that's where nurse, great, but really not somebody with financial expertise.
Okay. So as opposed to a nurse, the main character
A
is.
financial advisor, which
Oh, okay.
I cringed at.
There you go.
Yes. I cringed at first when people started recommending that, and I was like, it sounds like I'm writing a book about myself, and I'm not the lead character. I needed somebody with the experience to be able to make sense that they were able to talk intelligently about the subjects and what everybody was going through.
Yeah. I can see why maybe your first thought was maybe a little too on the nose, but it worked out at the end of the day. The book is subtitled A Fable About Personal Finance. Tell us a little bit more about the book and how this fable teaches us personal finance lessons.
That's a great question. So I've got to give credit to John Gordon, who wrote The Energy Bus. I wrote it many years ago, and it's a fable about team dynamics and building team dynamics. And I love the lesson, the way it was presented and the way it educated you, but in a very interesting and readable fashion. So that's the way I came up with the structure of it being a fable. And I've been in the business since 1992, and I worked for SunTrust for a long period of time and had a very large number of clients that I worked with, and didn't appreciate the value in that experience until later. But what happened is that I had seen so many situations where I'd sat down with people to describe what they were going through. And now 30 something years later, there are certain themes that I noticed that are consistent, not necessarily the exact same situation, but a lot of very similar themes that people go through. And that was why I decided that I could use those experiences and do it in a fable, in a relatable way where people might see themselves in the book, might see other people in the book, but more, I think, important is hopefully the lesson that somebody with 30 something years in the industry felt strong enough about this, that felt like everybody, investors from 18 to 100 and advisors, I think, can learn something about how important these forces are that these forces that we all have, that we deal with, that affect our decision making, in particular revolving around finance.
Yeah, because the book, and I think your specialty as well, one of your specialties is behavioral finance. So the book is not a tactical, this is how you get out of debt, this is how you budget, this is how you invest type book. It's really talking about behaviors. And these fables, would you say that they're more cautionary tales? This is what this person did in this fable, don't do this? Or is it more of an example of what to do?
I think it's a combination of both. I think the reality is that, and I'm not a psychologist, and my behavioral finance background is because I became passionate about it because of trends that I saw back in the late 90s. So I've studied it quite a bit and done everything I could to understand it. And where I think the book comes in is that it's not necessarily saying, okay, this is what you need to avoid or this is what you need to do. What it's more trying to convey is that the way the human brain works, if you think about a bird, when a bird flies, it's amazing to watch. But if you think about it from a physics, from a technical standpoint, how many really critical technical decisions that a bird is making, and a bird has a bird brain. We have a similar part of our brain to that, but we also have the cognitive part, the more advanced part of our brain. And the issue is that the transition from when we're making decisions between those two parts of our brain are so subtle that it's hard for us to understand. Driving a car is an example I use when I speak all the time. When you first start driving a car, it's hard. There's sensory overload, there's a lot of things to think about. A couple months ago, I was driving with my family and I wasn't even paying attention. I wasn't listening or looking at what I was doing. I took a left on the interstate just like I do every day. I was totally on autopilot and everybody started screaming at me, "Where are you going?" I was on autopilot headed to work. And a car is a very complex piece of machinery that we're driving. It's an example of how we can train ourselves to take very complicated situations and go on autopilot. And that happens a lot to all of us. That's just the way the brain works. The book is really designed to show it in terms of what actually is happening when people do that in the context of their finances, if that makes sense.
It does. It does. Yeah, and let's get into a few examples because you said that this is based on trends that you have observed over a 30 some odd year career. I'm particularly curious about trends that were there 30 years ago and are there now. So, give us an example.
30 years ago or 300 years ago is what I would say. Herding is, and I don't like to use technical bias terms necessarily because I don't think it matters, but herding is a common one. It's a bias. And back when we were cavemen, herding meant we stayed with our tribe. And what that allowed us to do is we were safe with the tribe. And so it's naturally ingrained in the way that we make decisions, and whether it's clothing trends or investments, you see a lot of activity in herding trends. One of the classic examples for anybody that was around or investing back in the 90s was the dot-com period. Everybody was investing in dot-com because everybody was investing in dot-com, and you saw that in valuations where there were companies that said something or other .com, and everybody was pouring money in it, which meant everybody was pouring money in it, and that herding actually caused prices to go to levels that didn't even make financial sense. But it continued. I think Greenspan's famous irrational exuberance speech was in 1996, and the bubble didn't burst till 2000. So that's a classic example. You probably are maybe seeing it in AI now, where AI is legitimate. .com period, the whole internet period was legitimate, but the herding took that to an entirely different level. And I think in some parts of the AI market, you're starting to see that now.
Yeah, I have very vivid memories of the .com bubble. I think I was really just coming into my own as an investor, really getting into it. And yeah, I definitely remember the hysteria, the you have to get in now. I can remember listening to CNBC in the morning, which is probably the worst thing in the world you could do during that period.
I do it, but still, yeah.
And it was just the message that these people were delivering was, this time is different. You will never see this again in your lifetime. Get in now. And it was all the way up until the bubble burst. And a person like me who kind of drug his feet until things got real frothy and then decided to jump in. I learned lessons as an investor that I think in the long run have actually helped me. Just using this example, what's a takeaway from an awareness of this herding mentality for listeners who are just everyday investors? Is this something that they need to be aware of, as in, oh, yeah, AI is making the markets really frothy. Maybe I shouldn't be in the markets? What's the takeaway?
Yeah, it depends on the individual situation. So it's really hard to say that, hey, look, here's how to apply that. I think being aware that those things happen, and Bitcoin could be another example. Personally, I'm a believer in valuing investments, projections on what the value is going to be in the future. And if it's worth less, it's a good investment. Bitcoin is one of those that I don't like. The experts that I know that are experts in valuation can't explain to me how to value it. So is that something that is purely a herding, or is it a technology that I just don't understand right now? I think that when you, and realistically, there's people that have made an absolute ton of money in .com stocks or in Bitcoin. So I think at the end of the day, the takeaway is that if you don't understand the value, and if you think that there's a chance where this could be one of those situations, make sure that you're never exposing yourself to a point where you're putting your future at risk. And I think that kind of is a general rule to me, is that, look, risk is great. You can take as much risk as you want, but if you are unaware that, if your priorities are, hey, look, I want to make sure that I'm never homeless, I'm never broke, I always have this amount of money, whether it's $1,000 or $100 million in the bank, be aware of the risk that you're taking with some of these more speculative investments so that you never risk that non-negotiable that you have. That, I think, is part of the problem. And it's a classic example that happens with younger investors right now, is that, hey, look, stocks are going up. Tech stocks are going up even more. I have my cash that I want to use next year. Why am I leaving it in cash? Let me put it in tech stocks because it'll be worth 10, 20, 30% more. It doesn't always work that way. So being just aware of the potential inflated risk that could be happening because of herding or any of these different activities, I think, is as an individual investor. And that's where it gets a little bit complicated, because it's real hard for a novice investor to say, okay, this valuation is completely out of whack when you're looking at growth trends that are happening out there. But just be aware that these cycles can happen all the time. And we're in a AI cycle now that could last another 5, 6, 10 years. Who knows what it is? But when it ends, there will be survivors, but there will be a lot of people a lot of companies that will not be around. So the application of that is just being aware of the fact that herding works on the way up and herding works on the way down. And when you see everybody run for the exit, it could be to a point where Amazon is a perfect example, got crushed in 2000 and 2001. Yeah. It was a great investment if you just held on to it.
Yeah, Amazon was the example that came to mind, and the example that I use when I'm talking with people, because for years, Amazon didn't turn a profit. So you could argue that investing in it at that time may have been more speculative. You can argue that, you can not argue it. But the thing is, if you felt that way, even if you were ultra conservative and felt that way, if you had invested in Amazon, even once it started to turn a profit, even once it was no longer just selling books, once it was a more proven commodity, if you'd invested in Amazon, you still would have done quite well for yourself. So it's not like you missed the opportunity. Now, did you miss an opportunity relative to if you had bought the stock day one? Yeah, you did. But those people who waited 8, 9, 10 years for the model to really prove itself and then invested, they did pretty well for themselves.
Yeah.
And yeah, it's the same thing with AI or crypto, in my opinion.
No, I totally agree. And I think that's a beautiful example because Amazon, in its early period where it wasn't making money and it was putting all of its resources back into growing the business, and Amazon as a business that's highly profitable are two totally different risk profiles. And either one of those are okay. But if I take 90% of my money and put it into that first risk profile, that is highly risky. So my goal, I should be comfortable with the fact that it could be worth zero. So that's the lesson, is that if it's not making money and the stock's going well, it could be the next home run. Probability is that it isn't, and therefore make sure that the amount of exposure that you have financially isn't going to put the rest of your life or other goals that you have in jeopardy.
Yeah, because for those of us who were around in that time, I can remember a time where there was Amazon and there was pets.com and there was drcoop.com, and everybody was betting on a different horse. They were all the same in those nascent days. Yeah, maybe you could have picked Amazon out of a hat and lucked out, but if you picked pets.com out of that same hat, you would have had a different result. I have an investment magazine around here somewhere from that time period. I keep it just as a reminder of things because it's a magazine not in publication anymore, but it was our winners and losers for whatever year it was, 1999 or 98 or whatever it was. One of the losers was Amazon, or one of the sales was Amazon. One of the buys was Enron. That tells you everything you need to know about speculative investing. Yeah, just understand what you're doing. Am I investing or am I speculating? The other thing that I think is a valuable lesson for investors is just knowing that these bubbles exist, knowing that today the market's at an all-time high or close to an all-time high. We can bet right now that's not going to last. It's going to go bust. There will be a correction. There will be, almost by the law of economics, there will be a recession at some point. If you understand the big picture of the game you're playing, it really steadies you to go through those down cycles because it's not the end of the world. It's not unprecedented. It's just the way markets react.
Yeah, and the probabilities, again, the market could continue to go to all-time highs for the next 5 years, but every single year there's 1 in 50 that the market could drop 50%. And those odds, you just be aware of that. Yeah, that's one of the things I tell people all the time. You have to be comfortable that if you're invested in the S&P, which is a completely different risk profile than .coms, there's a 1 in 50% chance or something around there that it could drop by 50%.
And you have to know that for yourself because, again, going back to the media and the CNBCs and those things of the world, the sky's going to be falling. It's the end of the world as we know it, that kind of thing. So it's really something you have to know inside yourself so you can withstand all of the irrational negativity, I'll call it, that's coming from media soures.
Yeah, and I think that's a great point, the media, because understand their job is to get viewership.
Yep.
And it has nothing to do with giving financial advice. And I think that's an important distinction, that they're in the business of keeping you entertained or scared or whatever, or excited, and not necessarily giving you advice on what your life is going to be like in 10 or 20 years.
Yeah, they're looking for that emotional response.
Yeah.
And during a bull run, during the tech bubble, that emotional response was, oh boy, you got to get in right now. You got to get in right now. And you have to stay tuned for the stocks that we're recommending. That's the emotional thing. And when things are going down, it's just whether you're watching because of enthusiasm or fear makes no difference to them. The ratings are the same. So that's just something we have to realize and temper our emotions because of that, going back to the behavioral finance part of this. So what's another trend that you've seen persist? Because I think what we're talking about here are basic human nature things. Like you said, they go back even further than 30
Yeah,
years.
another one is that I see frequently is overconfidence. And it's interesting. I work with people that are highly successful professionals, attorneys, CPAs, CFOs, and nobody is insulated from overconfidence. As a matter of fact, it's part of human nature. If you thought about it, if you didn't have a whole lot of confidence, think about what that'd be like to talk to that person. So it's a natural part of who we are. The problem is that pendulum swings sometime. And if I'm a highly successful surgeon and I'm saving people's lives, that's great. But that also becomes part of who you are. And a lot of times you'll see people that are highly successful entrepreneurs or professionals feel that education or experience or intellect can be applied to becoming a successful investor. So I see a lot of times, a classic one that I use in my book is somebody that is successful running a business, sells the business, and then gets bored and decides they want to become a real estate developer. And that's an area where, it's similar running a business to being in real estate, but very different. Being aware that not all your skill set, even though it feels like it's fully transferable, doesn't transfer. Having confidence is amazing. We're all subject to overconfidence.
Yeah, it's funny how overconfidence is a issue. On the one hand, at least from my observation, the opposite is also true for kind of a different set of people. And maybe frame it as confidence is not quite correct. I'm talking about people who are fearful of investing. And that's just something that I've observed. I'm not sure if your book gets into that phenomenon or not.
Yeah, it does. But there's a speech that I just gave recently, and in it, I talked about a lady who I met back in the late 90s, early 2000s. And she was in her late 60s, had recently lost her husband, who was very successful. They've been married for 40 something years. And we became very close. And she became literally like a second mother to me. And after a couple years, she confided in me that her biggest fear was running out of money, like lose sleep fear. And in talking to her in her history, she grew up shortly after the Depression, was in very challenging financial times as a kid. When she was married to her husband, when they moved into their first apartment, they were broke. They couldn't afford furniture. They ate and slept literally on the floor. But the interesting thing is when I met her, she was worth about $150 million. And she had a $360,000 a year pension. And she lived fairly modestly. Like running out of money was not going to happen. So the interesting thing is that was one of the things that we focused on in our meetings, showing why that I felt so confident about that. But we repeatedly do that just to make her feel better, because it was so ingrained in her to be afraid of being broke that it was not, no matter what I was going to do, it was not going to go away. I had to make her switch her brain from fear mode to, hey, logically, this isn't real. And that's that's one of those that it shocked me about it. But it happens to people, whether you've got $150 in the bank or $150 million in the bank. There are some people that are just fearful. And that then, I see it all the time where somebody in their 30s, 40s, 50s, or whatever it is, their 401k is sitting in cash. And I'm like, you get to the bottom of why you feel that way, because this is money that you're not going to be touching until you're retired. And then it's not like you're going to spend all of it. You're going to then live off of it for 30 years or whatever it is. So that's a great example of kind of one side and the other. Overconfidence being feeling like you're bulletproof, and the other one feeling like the whole world is falling underneath you when it's not rational.
Yeah, in that fear scenario that you pointed out, that person who has all of their 401k in cash, part of that, I think, is really not fully understanding risk, because there are a couple, there's several types of risk. And as an investor, there is risk that if I invest in a stock, that stock will go down and I'll lose money. There is also a risk that if I save, but that money just sits in cash for 30 years, by the time I use it, inflation waits for no man, and my money has not been keeping up with inflation. So the risk of inflation has also eroded my money. So it's not like you can just put it under the mattress. That doesn't protect it from risk, because inflation is going to happen. So just understanding that, I think sometimes, and reframing how people look at risk, I've found that to be helpful.
Yeah, completely. It's the way, one of the things I learned a long time ago is that getting into the industry, I technically wanted to understand finance, personal finance in particular, because it's very different than corporate finance or other types of finance. One of the things that I learned is that you can say something technically correct and people can't hear it. So there's the risk of losing your money because of the stock market, and then there's the risk of not having enough money, which is going back to the purchasing power and inflation. So one of the things I wanted to bring up is that, okay, so this sounds good. Give me a tool that anybody can walk away and actually put this concept or these concepts to use. Have you ever done a vision board?
I've heard of them. I've never personally done one.
So I did a vision board about 15 years ago with just a group of employees as a kind of a team building exercise. And in doing it, there were things on it that I ended up accomplishing, and that led me to then doing a bucket list, right? Now what I tell people is, when they get together with me, I was like, give me a list of what you want to accomplish in your life. It's really a bucket list. Give me 20 things. And anybody right now, try to write down 20 things, and it's hard. But this is the rest of your life. So what I always say is, once we get somebody working on it, is, look, make that list 100. And it takes time. It's hard. Once you get that list of 100, it's a work in progress. Take that list of 100 and circle the top 5. And a bucket list doesn't have to be, I want to go to Europe, or I want to do this or do that. A bucket list is that I want to have secure retirement, which is, and when you work on it, eventually what you find is that there's certain like non-negotiables. Like in my life, I want to make sure that my kids' college is paid for. I want to make sure that I'm able to take care of myself and my wife financially the rest of my life. I want to go to Central Africa and fish. I've got those things on there. But when I circle my 5 non-negotiables, that's the beginning of helping you understand putting risk into perspective. Because one of the things that I see people all the time is that it feels really good to go out and buy a new house, new car, whatever it is, clothes. But if your priorities are clear in your mind that, hey, look, I never want to run out of money. Okay, do you want the new car? Do you want to make sure that you're putting money in your 401k? Then all of a sudden it's a different perspective. And I think that taking the time to kind of lay out that 100 list, prioritize what are those five really non-negotiables, then helps you make decisions in the short run about risk, taking risk or not taking risk, or prioritizing spending or work. One of the sad things that I see people occasionally do is, when we're in our 20s and 30s, we work hard. And a lot of people shutting that off when you get to the point later in your life, like kids, when you're having your kids are teenagers or younger, taking the time off to spend it with them, that's over. You can work later. So making sure that you're really clear about how you're spending your time, where you're spending your effort, all kind of ties in together to, okay, should I be working less? Should I be working more? Should I be saving less? Should I be saving more? People ask me all the time, should I buy Bitcoin? Should I buy stocks? Should I put more money in cash? And I always tell them, what are you trying to accomplish? And most of the time, literally, I get a, what do you mean? I want to make money, or I want to, it's a vague term. It's not really their own personal five best from their bucket list. I love that. If you haven't done it, do a bucket list of 100 and sit down with your wife and compare it. It's a great exercise. And then keep it someplace where once a year or whatever, you kind of look at it. And first of all, it's great because, like, I wanted to go to, one of my bucket list items was I wanted to go to the Army Navy game. And 2 weeks before the game in December, I got a call from a buddy of mine. Hey, look, I got 2 tickets. Do you want to go? I got kids. Christmas is coming. I got a job. I got all these different things to do. And I'm like, Connie, what should I do? And she's, it's a bucket list. Go.
I like that because the fact that you had already established that up front, even when having that conversation with your wife, got reframes it. Had you not had that conversation, had you not already said how much this means to me in life to be able to do this, then her reaction could have been different. It's, what are you going to do that for? I really need you to do this, or why are you going to spend money going to a silly football game, that kind of thing. You don't have to go through that conversation. You guys are already aligned.
Yeah, and for me, it's easier because I would have felt guilty. We had our Christmas party the night before, and I didn't get home to bed until 1 o'clock. I had a 7 o'clock flight out to get to the game. And then I had to be back early the next morning. So I had a 6 o'clock flight back from Baltimore. And I mean, that was brutal 3-day period. I was smiling the whole time. And it was because I had complete clarity that this was something that I really wanted to accomplish. And the same thing, if you really want that dream home, and that's one on your 5 list, then it makes it a whole lot easier to be able to prioritize other decisions that you're making. Or on the flip side, if you're looking at that dream house and you realize, you know what, I hate my job, I want to retire. How are you prioritizing those? That's very personal.
Yeah, I love it. I love it. I'm in the process of really putting together the CFO at home concept more systematically. And that's actually the first step on that ladder that I'm building. So we're definitely aligned as far as that's concerned.
Is that one of your bucket list items?
Yeah, and actually, I hope it doesn't take that long. Yeah, I think it absolutely qualifies as a bucket list item for me.
Love it.
Scott, I've really enjoyed the conversation today. Again, the book is The Lobster League. Your site is thelobsterleague.com. As we speak here in early January of 2026, the book has just released. Is there anything else that you'd like to tell the audience about the book before we wrap it up here?
Now, I will say one thing. I had my 89-year-old neighbor call me on my way in to take this call, and he gave me a lot of praise for the book. He said it was really well written and it was really enjoyable. Hopefully that's the goal of the book, is to make it, hey, you know what, I learned something, but that was well written.
Yeah, it seems the format seems to be great for a person who maybe necessarily doesn't nerd out on this subject the way that you and I do. And at the same time, it makes it relatable. So even if you're a money nerd listening to this podcast, buy it for the non-nerd you love. Read it for yourself, because it'll help you to maybe see how more well-balanced people look at these things. And at the same time, if your spouse is a non-money person, hey, share it with them, discuss it, maybe help you guys get a little bit more aligned on money. So, Scott, again, really appreciate your time. We will add thelobsterleague.com to the show notes of this episode. We'll also add your LinkedIn profile. I understand that's mainly where you hang out as far as social media is concerned. Outside of that, I want to thank you for your time. Thanks for being on CFO at Home today.
Thank you, Vincent. Appreciate it.